the social principles are not constitution. They are suggested, but they're not things on which you proceed to define the church and its being. But the presumption is that they are. But that's this kind of choice that's being made. There's no, as I approach this whole issue, the first question is, I don't respond to the, I'm not concerned what the sex is of a person, I'm concerned about their gender. If we could stop talking about sex and started talking about gender, then we would have a place to begin to confront and to deal with what we're facing as a church. Now, one of our problems is, and I don't know how you anticipated this discussion to proceed, but we have a very large and strong group of clergy that call themselves the Wesleyan Covenant Association. They have come out and said, if we don't prevent there being marriage possibilities for persons of the same sex, they don't talk gender, but sex, we're leaving. And that's a sizable group of people that have made that. The issue now is whether we're going to find a way through all of this, or whether we're going to split as a church over this particular issue. My own personal feeling is, there's lots of things you come with when you're born. Think about just a simple thing. When do you know whether your child is right-handed or left-handed? Do they choose that? Or is that a part of the system they come with? Or are they ambidextrous? You know, where does this... I have vivid memories in my own life of the first time a man tried to get me to play with his sex organ. And it was totally revolting. I was only in first grade at the time. What revolted me about that? That isn't something I'd been taught, but that's the way it was with me. And I had a second occasion, not of the same kind, but of the same issue, where a person closer to my age, when I was about in junior high school, wanted me to join with him in making things out of wood and stuff like that. But the purpose was that he could get close to me physically. And when he started moving after me physically, the whole thing ended. This is my experience. We come with a gender definition. We also come with a gender preference that you cannot see and only discover as you grow up, so to speak. What are you going to do if this creation of ourselves allows for same gender preference? My gender preference is opposite. It's not same. But I believe that persons are born with a gender preference, that it finally becomes known. And there's not much you can do about that. And if that's the case, that changes the whole set of relationships between people.
Yeah, I remember, John and colleagues, late 70s, 77, 78, we had merged several small United Methodist institutions close here on the campus to King Avenue. And so we had multiple buildings after that merger. And no sooner had we become Summit United Methodist Church, but that first, the Gay Active Alliance on campus, and then the Metropolitan Community Church, both came to us wanting space. The Gay Active Alliance, because they literally were being beaten on the campus of Ohio State when they met. Not all of them, but some of them. And then the Metropolitan Community Church, because that gender preference congregation was worshiping in a gay bar, and they wanted a more appropriate setting. Well, we were a brand new congregation. And so what do you do with that when some of us, myself included, already were pretty far along in terms of our beliefs about this, but at the same time we're trying to be fair to a new congregation. And so we engaged in an early study of this whole issue, and we did it around the Wesleyan Quadrilateral. And when we came to reason and experience, and I'll come back to the Bible too, because that has been, I think, the biggest subterfuge in this whole issue, the way the right wing of our church has stolen the biblical message, and the left wing or the moderate wing has remained quiet, falsely quiet. But when you examine this issue rationally, your very point of, I did not choose to be a heterosexual. My friends who are not heterosexual didn't make that choice. Therefore, the question is not your preference, but your behavior. I've long held that. And I must say that when I mentioned that large number of complaints, none of those was with a gay person that I had to adjudicate. They all were with straight people, every one of them. So reason off, but also experience. Those of us who are straight, at least in the 70s, and I think for many even till now, don't really know gay and lesbian people. They're around, they're in our face, but we don't really know them because it's a no-no subject still with many people. And you go through those biblical passages, those 7 passages, you go through them and you do solid exegesis. The word homosexuality wasn't even in a modern language until the mid part of the 19th century. And to foist that onto ancient biblical texts is erroneous, just flat out erroneous.
But this is what frustrates me the most, is because there are our colleagues, our clergy, who still read them the other way and insist that their way of reading it is right.
It's the only way.
And it's the only way, and I don't understand how they can be 21st century biblical scholars and get to that point. It baffles me.
Right. Well, we did it late in the 20th century around the story of Ham, around race. That somehow the story of Ham meant that black folks were supposed to be slaves to white people. I mean, in the Bible Belt we did that. People who seemingly know the Bible and waive it. And we've done the same thing, with the Sodom story. Sodom, I mean, that's not about sex, that's about hospitality. Read the text.
I was, when we first retired, we were living on the Pennsylvania line, Pennsylvania, Maryland, Lois and I, and out of our backyard we could look across farmland, and there was a place where they did hang gliding. We could see them go off, they'd disappear, they'd come back up, and when we'd had company, we'd often go up there. Well, we had company one Saturday afternoon, and they said, we'd love to go over there. So we went up and got on the rocks, and we hardly arrived there until 3 carloads of kids arrived. And these kids were in junior high school, they were all boys, and they were on a weekend retreat learning what the Bible was all about. So they came up to where we were watching these people take off, and wanted to convict us and convert us to be where they were. And I said to them, well, no, maybe you could help me out. I have a little bit of a question here. I said, the scripture says, doesn't it, that God created Adam and God created Eve? Oh, yes. And they had some children, didn't they? Yes, they had 3 boys. And I said, the boys, didn't they get married and have kids? Where did the girls come from? Oh, said this young man, why, he said, Each of the boys had sex with his mother, and she produced a girl that he eventually married.
Oh, that's great.
The Supreme Court has
Gosh.
done the church a favor.
Yes, it has.
It has said that neither your color nor your gender is an issue that should prevent you from the privileges of living. That is quite a decision. They said it's unfair for a constitution to say that only a man and a woman can have special privileges in living their life. Why can't two men or two women also have that same privilege? And that's where they changed the Constitution of the United States of America. And rightly so. Now the church has got to face the same issue. That's where I come in all of this.
Do you know, this is going to be heretical. Maybe schism is not the worst thing in the world. The American church is the product of schism and rejoining and schism and joining. It's always been there. Phyllis Tickle, in her latest book on the church, says that when there's schism, both parts grow. I wonder if the divine isn't grieved at how much time and energy we spend arguing with each other about this that could be spent on proclaiming the good news for the sake of the world. So I find myself looking at the commission and thinking they have an impossible job. How in the world they're going to come with anything that's going to reach a just resolution, as it were, in general conference, is beyond me. And it seems to me that one of the most just things that could happen would be to find a way to allow people to part in good company.
Yes.
To work out the finances, the mechanics, and find ourselves time and space to be about the work of the gospel.
Well, concomitant with that, in retrospect, the 1939 merger was done on the back of black people. And I would argue that the United Methodist movement now has never gotten out from under that sin. That unity, so to speak, was a false unity. How can you talk church at the expense of a race? That's historically valid, I think, my point, what's happening. Where are the black folks in the United Methodist Church? Those who have stayed are marvelous people, but they're fewer and fewer and far between. That's not an accident. And I wonder, I really wonder, I'm in personal, deep pain about the state of this world. When you look at what we're doing to God's good creation, you look at the divide between the Islamic world and the so-called Christian world and the need for work to be done there. When you look here in Ohio at the opiate epidemic, when you look at so many young people who don't come to our churches anymore because we are so caught up in ancient superstition and stupid positions on a few little issues, all of that breaks my heart. And Judy, I'm where you are. I'm for a loving and caring separation. Sometimes marriages just shouldn't be. And to waste time trying to hold them together seems to me to be false. And when you look at the money being spent, money that could be used, and I can name the places, and you can too, John, right here in Columbus, where kids are going to bed hungry, where schools don't have, on and on and on I go. One other thing, and this is a hard word, but I think it needs to be said. I don't know what right in a global church African bishops or delegates have the right to dictate by virtue of their votes, the sexual mores of our denomination. I say that because I've always believed before you talk about somebody else's house, you better be sure your own house is in order. And what has happened historically on that continent does not suggest that Africans ought to be leading the way on matters of sexuality. I know that sounds harsh. I guess in a sense, I feel that it needs to be said somewhat harshly because it's kind of racist to say yes, sir, when you know something isn't right.
And it's interesting that there have been commissions to develop a way to go as a global church whose reports have been stalled. And I want to be careful here because I'm going to throw some stones at a colleague, but it's been stalled, I believe, by those whose positions are more conservative than mine. Let's put it that way. Those proposals for a different form for the global church would answer the
Yes.
angst you and I feel
Yes.
about the preponderance of African bishops and delegates at General Conference.
Right. Maybe we could learn something from the Romans, the Roman Catholics. How to keep the tent together, but have segments in that tent where at certain points we cooperate, but we don't try to set the table for each other at the.
There's been a proposal made like that. Will it ever see the light of day? Hopefully in 2020 it will.